Hello everyone, this is Christine Casey with the Haagen-Dazs Honeybee Haven on the UC Davis campus in Davis, California. Today I'll be talking about bees in the home food garden. We'll look at some of the common bees that occur and do pollination in home food gardens and what you can do to encourage and support them. I'm assisted by Andrea Suarez, who's our student intern. The Haven, as the name suggests, is the result of a gift from Haagen-Dazs. We've been around for 10 years and provide information and inspiration for gardeners. We host undergraduate classes and student interns, do a lot of youth outreach, and also do research projects to look at the relationship between bees and gardens. We're open every day, free of charge, so if you're in the Davis area, I hope you'll be able to visit. We do depend completely on donors and grants for support. We have no dedicated source of funding. So I want to right up front acknowledge some of the groups that have provided support to us over the years, with a particular acknowledgement to our volunteers who do a lot of the work in the Haven and help to make it the great place that it is. So let's move on to talk about insect pollination in food crops. Insect pollinators in California agriculture are tremendously important. California is the country's largest agricultural economy, and there are some crops, because of our unique Mediterranean climate, in which we're the world leader. For example, almonds. We grow about 90% of all of the world's almonds. And almonds are have an obligate requirement for bee pollination. No bees, no almonds. Because of the scope of our industry and the need for honeybee pollination in almonds early in the year, the California almond industry drives the entire U.S. pollinator industry, the U.S. beekeeping industry. And if you're growing almonds in your home garden, of course, that's a factor as well. Most of the other crops that we grow in our agriculture and in our home gardens can get by without bee pollinators, but certainly with bees we see enhanced yield, improved quality, and improved nutrition when bees are present. So let's go on and take a look at some of the common crops that we grow in home food gardens. I'll start with tomatoes, probably the most commonly grown plant in the home food garden. There's dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of varieties out there to grow, and homegrown tomatoes are just really so much tastier and fresher than much of what we get in the supermarket. It's obvious why people want to grow their own tomatoes. Tomatoes are wind and bee pollinated, but bee pollinated tomatoes have been found to have better nutrition, such as more vitamin C, and to weigh more. You get better yield if bees are present. And when we think about pollination in the home food garden, or really in commercial agriculture as well, we tend to think of honeybees. And indeed, they do perform most of the pollination in our agricultural systems. There are some crops, however, that honeybees cannot pollinate, and tomatoes and their relatives in the Solanaceae fall into that group. So tomatoes and their relatives are pollinated by buzz pollinators, and some of these include carpenter bees and bumblebees. And buzz pollination is a unique sort of behavior in which the bee holds onto the flower and vibrates their body. And you can see a representation of the sound that's made when that happens in the diagram on the lower left. So let's look more specifically at that buzz pollination. And I think it's a really interesting part of bee behavior. So anthers are the part of the plant that produce pollen. And typically these are exposed and open so that bees can easily pick up and access that pollen. In plants in the tomato family, however, those anthers are fused together. And you can see that in the photograph of the tomato flower, that central yellow cone that's outlined in black is those fused anthers where the pollen is produced. And if you look at the schematic diagram in the center, you can see that those contain a small slit at the base, and that's where the pollen actually leaves and is able to be accessed by bees. So honeybees can't access that pollen. They can't reach inside those slits, and they can't do buzz pollination. But carpenter bees, bumblebees, as well as some other species, but those are two of the big ones, are able to do this buzz pollination, where the bee will land on the flower and can actually vibrate their body so that it shakes the entire flower so that the pollen falls out and lands on the bee body. And in fact, before greenhouse tomato growers had access to bumblebees that they could purchase, tomatoes in the greenhouse were pollinated with electric toothbrushes. They would walk along and vibrate the plant with the toothbrush for that pollination to take place. So what happens is the pollen drops out and lands on the bee's body. And the bee then moves on to the next flower. And you can see this on the center photograph on eggplant, as well as on the lower right with the close-up. When she lands on that next flower, her body comes in contact with the stigma. And this is the part of the flower where the pollen will land and travel to the ovaries. So when she moves on to the next flower to drink nectar or to vibrate the flower again for pollen, she comes in contact with that stigma, the pollen lands, travels down to the ovary, and that's the pollination event that triggers the development of the tomato. So as I mentioned, bumblebees and carpenter bees are the bees that we're most likely to encounter in our home gardens that will be responsible for this kind of pollination. So bumblebees are ground nesters. They need some bare soil for nesting. Bumblebees will use a wide mix of flowers, so as many different kinds of flowers as you can have around your garden will be helpful. They do tend to go for larger flowers because they are larger bees. And bumblebees overwinter as mated queens, so only the female queen overwinters. And when she emerges in the spring, she needs lots of protein so that she can develop her eggs and they can become the workers that will sustain her throughout the rest of the year. So an early season pollen source like California poppies are really helpful to have for bumblebees. So envision your food garden having some bare strips of land around it. Doesn't have to be a lot by any means, as well as a mix of flowers that includes some early season pollen sources like poppies. Carpenter bees, on the other hand, do not nest underground. They will nest above ground, and they will excavate their own nests using stumps, decaying tree branches. So leave some old logs if you don't have decaying trees just standing in your garden, which I think probably most of us don't. Those will be helpful to providing nesting sources for these bees. And again, these are very large bees. The valley carpenter bee is the largest bee in California, so they're going to need large flowers as well. Moving on to look at fruit, I'm going to use strawberries as an example because I think this is, again, the most commonly grown in our home food gardens. And strawberries, again, there will be some wind pollination, but studies have shown no bees equals fewer, lower quality strawberries. Basically what happens is every time a strawberry pollination event occurs, and each one of those little seeds that you see in a strawberry fruit is the result of a pollination event. When that happens, it triggers a number of changes in the plant that cause the growth of the fruit. So if every available stigma doesn't receive pollen, you're not going to get as large of a fruit. And you can see that's pictured here with that deformed lower portion of the strawberry. And again, wildflower strips next to the strawberry fields have been shown to increase visits to those strawberry flowers. So planting around the field is important. One plant that's been shown in particular to be useful for this is borage. And borage is an interesting plant because it produces, most plants produce their nectar on a daily cycle, whereas borage will basically continuously replenish its nectar, and so is a really valuable resource for bees. So planting some of this around your strawberry garden may be helpful. And we have different bee species that will pollinate strawberries, including the mason bees, honeybees, the mining bees, this is a group we haven't mentioned before, and bumblebees. So let's look at each of these in more detail. The mason bees are in that leafcutter bee family, and we're talking specifically about bees in the genus Osmia. These are cavity nesters, so those nesting blocks can be valuable for them, as well as providing nesting materials. In the case of Osmia, that would be mud. And these are small bees, so smaller flowers will be valuable. Honeybees, of course, will use a variety of flowers, so having that available and available year-round is important, not because you're going to need pollination service year-round, but having a year-round food source for honeybees keeps them healthier, and healthy bees are going to be good pollinators. Honeybees also need a water source, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Those mining bees are in the genus Andrena, and these are small bees, so they need smaller flowers. And also are ground nesters, so again, having some bare soil somewhere around your food garden is going to be helpful for these. And then finally, the bumblebees also need bare soil, the mix of large flowers, and the early season pollen that we mentioned before. So looking at the osmia, you can provide nesting habitat for these in different ways. You can use nesting tubes, either purchased or bamboo pieces that you may have cut. Just make sure that they are the right size and that they are closed off, that are placed in a structure that is closed off at the end. They will not use it if they can see light through the nesting tube. Or you can provide bee blocks like the wooden blocks on the upper right. And I'll have Andrea post a link to a fact sheet that we have on our website, that, or you'll see it in the description. I'll have a link to a fact sheet on our website that will give you more details about using these nesting blocks in the garden. These are early season bees. The osmia in particular is being used by almond growers to supplement honeybees because they are active early in the year, February, when the almond crop needs pollination. And osmia also do well in bad weather. In fact, they're more likely to fly in cool and wet conditions than honeybees are. So they're valuable for those crops that need very early pollination for that as well. So providing early season blooms like the Ceanothus valley violet seen here that blooms in February is important for these bees. And then getting back to the need for water that is especially important for honeybees. We've been taught with our bird baths to make sure they're nice and clean. With honeybees, they prefer what we call dirty water. That is water that has organic debris that has fallen into it. This will leach out minerals and nutrients that are valuable for the bees. And in fact, they will change their water source over the course of the year if there's a nutritional deficiency in the hive that can be met with a certain water source. One way to provide water is a shallow pot bottom, something maybe 3/4 of an inch in depth. Leave some floating corks or stones in it so the bees have a perch. Mosquitoes generally aren't an issue because in most of the year it's hot enough that that water will evaporate in a day or two, long before a mosquito could complete its life cycle. But another great way to provide this water in the vegetable garden is to irrigate your vegetable garden with a soaker hose. This is an efficient way to deliver water to the garden, and the little drops of water that will come out of this hose are the perfect size for bees to ingest and carry back to the hive. You can see that here with these honeybees on the soaker hose in the lower left. So you could use this as a way to irrigate your home food garden and also provide water for bees. Finally, I want to talk about squash pollination, and this is really anything that's in the cucurbit family is generically often referred to as squash. And again, very commonly grown in the home food garden. I think zucchinis are something that many of us start with when we're getting involved in food gardening. And you probably recognize that very large yellow flower of the zucchini. No matter what the zucchini variety is, the flower will look like that. Pumpkin flowers, also very similar. And then cucumbers, also in that cucurbit family. The cucumber flower, however, is much smaller. You can see it on the left-hand side of that photo. It's only about 1.5 inches in diameter, but still has the same pollination needs as that very large zucchini flower. So squash are pollinated some by honeybees, but also very important for squash pollination is, of course, the squash bee. These bees are native to the area where squash originated in Central America. And as we have expanded the range of squash plants through our gardens, these bees have spread along with that. And superficially, when you look at the two, and this is a photo taken inside a squash bloom with the two bees next to each other, superficially you can see the two bees look pretty similar. But if you take a closer look, you'll notice that that squash bee has longer antennae than the honeybees. And this is that squash bee is in the longhorn bee group, and so that explains the length of the antennae. And those longhorn bees are ground nesters, so again, you'll need to have some bare soil around your garden for this bee. The male of the squash bee hangs out inside the blossoms during the day waiting for a female to come along. And sometimes they get trapped in there when that flower closes for the day. Squash blooms tend to close up by late morning. And if you come across a squash blossom that has closed for the day and you put your hand around it and feel it, the flower buzzing, there's a male squash bee inside. So finally, before I end, I want to talk a little bit about pest management. Many folks are growing their own fruits and vegetables because they want to be assured that they are growing something that does not have pesticide residues on it. Other folks may be using pesticides because they're more concerned with having a higher yield or with having fruit that doesn't have blemishes on it. No matter what perspective you're coming at it from, I'd encourage you to visit the UCIPM website that I have listed here. This is a portion of their site specific to home gardens, and you'll find a whole section on the pests and other problems that you'll encounter in home food production with a lot of really useful information. Some things to keep in mind. Pesticides are chemicals that are designed to kill insects. And that doesn't matter if they may be labeled organic, natural, safe, have a pretty green label with lots of flowers on it. They're still chemicals that are designed to kill insects and need to be used with the appropriate caution. Newer materials that have newer labels on them will clearly state that they are never to be applied when bees are present. Older materials may not have this caution, but it's just common sense. If bees are present on your flowers, you should never be applying pesticides to that plant. If for some reason you do need to apply pesticides, do it at dusk because bees will be less active then, and many of the materials that we're using in our home food gardens have 4 or 12-hour re-entry periods. So by the next day when bees are active, much of that active ingredient that's harmful to bees will have at least dried, if not started to degrade. And it's not just insecticides. Some fungicides can harm bees, and some fungicides, when combined with certain insecticides, will increase their toxicity to bees. And you can find more information about the specifics of this on the section of the UCIPM website that has specific information about pesticide toxicity to bees. They have an entire chart that lists the active ingredients and how toxic they are. Keep in mind also that slug control products may be harmful to bees, and some fertilizers also contain insecticides. So really, growing your own fruits and vegetables is really a great thing to do. It's really satisfying to just walk out your door and have something really fresh to eat, but we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's not harmful to bees. So just to finish up, if you've got more questions or would like to learn more, please visit our website, beegarden.ucdavis.edu. You'll find links there to our blog, to our social media, which includes Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And the YouTube channel in particular, I post lots of videos about particular bees, particular plants, a variety of topics having to do with bees and gardens. I'm also always updating that, so I'd encourage you to subscribe so that you'll get the latest information from us. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you next time.